I came back from my week-long hiking trip to find soggy wine glasses, damp towels, and something much worse. Linda from the neighborhood council had been throwing private parties in my hot tub. Without asking. Without shame. So, I did what any sane man would do. I turned my luxury spa into a trap filled with blue dye and chili oil. You should have seen her scream. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Linda-backed fake council plays dictator in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame. Yep, that's me. The guy whose private well Linda illegally tapped into to water her overpriced, award-winning garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. So how did we get from a peaceful backyard oasis to a full-scale suburban war fueled by spa sabotage and shady plumbing? Let's rewind. Underscore. The week before the chili oil incident, I had just returned from 7 glorious, phone-silent days hiking in the wilderness. No people, no cell service, no Lindas. Heaven. But the moment I stepped into my backyard, something felt off. A trail of wet footprints snaked across my stone path. A wine cork was wedged into a crack on my deck. 2 soaked beach towels draped over my lawn chairs like drunken flags of surrender. That would have been strange enough, but then I noticed my hot tub cover wasn't on right. It hung crooked, as if someone had tried to put it back in a hurry. I checked the water, lukewarm, lower than it should be. Smudges lined the tub's edge. Not mine. That's when I pulled out my phone and checked the security cam footage from the motion sensor I had installed last month. And that's when I saw her. Linda, head of the neighborhood council. The same woman who once left me a formal notice about my porch lights being too modern for the community aesthetic. There she was, sun hat, leopard print swimsuit, and a wine glass that probably cost more than her integrity, sinking into my tub like she owned it. She wasn't alone. 3 other women, all council members, clinked glasses and laughed like they were at a luxury retreat. I blinked. Rewound. Checked the timestamp. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. 4 times that week, while I was halfway up a mountain, this suburban mafia had turned my backyard into their personal Napa Valley. I marched across the street, footage loaded on my phone, ready for a confrontation. I knocked. She opened the door, all smiles and pearls. Mark, welcome back. Hope the trip was nice. I didn't even get a word in before she added, oh, by the way, I hope you don't mind. We made some good use of your tub while you were away. It just seemed like a shame to let it sit unused. Unused. My jaw almost hit her doormat. I mind, I said, as calmly as I could, though my left eye was twitching. It's private property. You had no right to be back there. She laughed, the kind of laugh people give when they think you're being dramatic. Oh, come now. Don't be so uptight. You weren't even here. I was halfway through crafting the perfect sarcastic comeback when she added, actually, I sent out a little thank you to the neighborhood. Hope you don't mind. I did mind. Deeply. And I minded even more when I saw the thank you in question. An official neighborhood council newsletter titled Soak Up the Summer, featuring a full paragraph about our so-called shared community amenities, i.e., my damn hot tub. I stared at the page. My blood pressure hit the roof. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about a hot tub. This was war. Underscore. First, I had my plumber install a backflow valve to ensure Linda would never tap into my water supply again. Then, I took things a step further. I filled the tub with blue dye and a healthy dose of chili oil. The next evening, right on schedule, Linda and her entourage arrived for their unauthorized soak. She sank into the water, swirled her wine, and, splash, she screamed. Blue dye clung to her skin, her swimsuit, her hair. The chili oil followed, igniting every pore it touched. She bolted from the tub, screeching, stumbling across my yard, dripping shame with every step. I watched from my kitchen window, sipping my coffee. Revenge had never smelled so spicy. Underscore. But Linda wasn't finished. 2 days later, a municipal inspector showed up at my door. Anonymous complaint, he said. Something about improper drainage, unauthorized lighting, possible graywater contamination. It was a kitchen sink complaint. Linda had thrown every possible violation at me, hoping something would stick. I smiled, invited him in, and showed him everything. Permits, water hookups, camera documentation. At the end of the inspection, he handed me a clean report. If you ever find out who filed this, let them know that false reports can have real consequences. Oh, I knew. And I was just getting started. Underscore. That weekend, I hosted the Backyard Reclamation Bash, a lighthearted celebration of clear boundaries and honest neighbors. I printed custom flyers with a cartoon hot tub, complete with a floating sign that said private means private. The whole street showed up. Even Greg, Susan, and Mike from the council. Even Linda got an invite. Not because I expected her to come, but because I wanted her to know she wasn't invisible. She was just irrelevant now. By the time the night was over, the neighborhood had turned against her. People shared their own Linda horror stories, her obsessive grass measurements, her attempts to sell custom council-compliant mailbox flags, her fake citations. By Monday, her power was gone. Her voting rights were suspended. And rumor had it, she was trying to sell her house. As for me, I still soak in my hot tub every Sunday. Only now, there's a tiny floating turtle named Lord Ripples, a silent guardian of suburban justice. Because when a fake council declares war on the wrong neighbor, all bets are off. Neighbor Mark, who so generously allowed us to host Wind Down Wednesdays in his beautiful spa space. I didn't know whether to scream or sue. That night, I sat on my deck, staring at my violated hot tub like it had cheated on me. My jets felt betrayed. My chlorine felt soiled. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about the tub. Linda had been pulling stunts like this for months. She once tried to fine another neighbor for planting roses that didn't match the so-called approved color palette. She sent a warning letter to an elderly couple because their wind chimes might exceed the noise ordinance. She wasn't just entitled. She was a dictator in yoga pants. The kicker? My house wasn't even under her neighborhood council's jurisdiction. I was on the edge of the development, technically outside the charter. That meant she had zero authority over me, my property, or my spa. And yet, she had the audacity to sneak into my yard and even publish my name in a council newsletter. Every single move she made was completely out of line. I decided to dig into the neighborhood council charter. What I found made me laugh, then seethe. Linda had been bluffing authority over non-members for years. Most people just didn't question her because they were afraid she'd bury them in bureaucratic nonsense. But not me. Not anymore. See, I'm not just a guy with a hot tub. I'm a systems engineer. My job is to find creative solutions to complex problems under pressure. And Linda? She had just become a very satisfying problem to solve. The next morning, I put together a plan, one that balanced legal compliance with delicious, untraceable pettiness. It started with a trip to the pool supply store. There, I picked up a bottle of tracer dye, the kind that turns pool water a brilliant shade of blue if someone enters, but is totally harmless and nearly impossible to wash off immediately. Then, I swung by the spice shop and grabbed a tiny bottle of ghost pepper chili oil concentrate. Just 2 drops of that in warm water? Absolute misery. But I wasn't done. I upgraded my security cameras, installed motion-triggered lights, and, just to be sure, scheduled a fake out-of-town camping trip by loudly telling the mail carrier I was going off-grid for the weekend. That Friday, I left my porch light off, turned on the hot tub to preheat, and waited. By Sunday morning, the trap was set. And Linda, like clockwork, was about to walk straight into it. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that she wasn't coming alone. This time, she was bringing a guest. Someone who would turn my petty revenge into a neighborhood-wide scandal that would make next door explode like a Roman candle. And oh boy, that's when things got real. Linda arrived that morning, smug as ever, wearing a visor and carrying a cooler full of something fizzy. But she wasn't alone. She brought reinforcements. 3 other women from the council, including Susan, the one who once tried to fine a neighbor for leaving their trash bin out 10 minutes past pickup. Then there was Greg, her second cousin who showed up at every community event like a sentient paper plate, always lurking, never contributing. And then there was the fourth guest. Someone I hadn't expected at all. Mike, the actual neighborhood council president. Or at least, the guy who was supposed to be in charge, until Linda convinced everyone he was too old to keep up and quietly took control. The fact that he was here, wearing his polo shirt and sandals, carrying a folding chair and a Tupperware of deviled eggs, told me this wasn't just another unauthorized hot tub brunch. This was a full-blown council-sanctioned backyard invasion. And it was happening right on schedule. I watched from my upstairs window, camera rolling, as they all shuffled into my backyard through the side gate. No knock. No text. Just a quick peek to make sure I wasn't home before they made themselves comfortable. Then, one by one, they lowered themselves into the warm, welcoming, sabotaged waters of my private spa. Linda was the first in, of course. Queen Bee. She eased herself into the water with a satisfied sigh, like Caesar stepping into his chariot. Her crew followed, laughing, clinking glasses, completely oblivious. At first, nothing happened. They settled in, took a sip of their drinks, relaxed into the bubbling water. Then Greg let out a yelp. "What the hell?" he sputtered, looking down at his now electric blue hands. Susan shrieked, scrambling out of the tub, her leopard print swimsuit now sporting an unflattering smooth tint. And then Linda. Poor, unsuspecting Linda. She shifted slightly, leaned back, and within seconds, the chili oil made contact. There are no words for the sound she made. A cross between a scream and an opera note. She launched herself out of the water, tripping over her own cooler, knocking over Mike's deviled eggs in the process. The other guests scrambled, dripping neon blue, all howling in varying levels of discomfort. I stepped outside, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold with the satisfaction of a man who had just delivered justice in the most spectacular way possible. Linda turned, furious, her face blotchy and burning from the chili oil. "Asterisk, you'll pay for this, Mark," she screeched, stomping toward me, still soaking, still glowing faintly blue. I just smiled. "Oh, I don't think so, Linda. But you will be explaining this to the municipal inspector when he drops by this week." Her face froze. Because Linda wasn't just trespassing. She wasn't just throwing unauthorized spa parties. She was also smack in the middle of an unlawful boundary expansion scheme that the county office had just started investigating. And suddenly, she had much bigger problems than blue hands and a burning backside. I turned, walking back inside as Linda cursed and slammed my gate behind her. Game. Set. Match. Giggles erupted, corks popped, glasses clinked. From the security audio feed, I heard Linda's smug voice ring out. "Cheers to another beautiful neighborhood council Sunday. And big thanks to Mark, our favorite off-the-grid nature boy, for making this possible." They had no idea what was coming. 10 minutes in, I saw it start. The water took on a deep, oceanic blue, not immediately obvious in the sunlight, but enough that one of the women paused mid-sip, squinting at her thighs. She ran a hand over her leg, frowned, and rubbed her fingers together. Linda waved her off. "It's just the jets," she said. "This tub always has a tint." That's when the chili oil kicked in. At first, it was subtle. Some shifting, some casual scratching. But then it escalated, fast. Linda's second cousin, Mike, shot up suddenly, nearly slipped, and shouted something not fit for a neighborhood brunch. Linda blinked, confused, and wiped her arm. Too late. Her skin was already blotchy, angry red splotches forming around her neck and chest. One of the other women shrieked and splashed backward, bumping into Greg, who looked more betrayed than alarmed, like the spa gods had forsaken him. Then came the burning. You don't realize how sensitive the human body is until you mix diluted ghost pepper extract into warm, aerated water. The jets only made it worse, circulating the oil in a full-body exfoliation of doom. They scrambled. Wine glasses went flying. Someone kicked the cooler. Linda practically launched herself out of the tub, slipping on the deck and landing with a loud thump, blue water trailing behind her like she had just tried to wrestle a smuff. I waited 10 seconds, then calmly stepped outside, phone in hand, my security camera feed already recording. Linda was hunched over, drenched, furiously scratching her arms while yelling at Greg to call someone. One of the women dabbed at her eyes with a pool towel. Mike was crouched on the lawn, cursing, possibly in German. I cleared my throat. Linda looked up, soaked, furious, and the exact shade of neon regret I had hoped for. "What the hell did you do to your tub?" she barked. I smiled. "You mean the tub on my private property that you broke into without permission? That one. You poisoned it," she shrieked. "My skin is on fire." I raised an eyebrow. "Nope. It's pool-safe dye and food-grade chili oil. Totally non-lethal. But you might want to avoid mirrors for a few days. That blue tint lasts a while." She wobbled to her feet. "I'm calling the police." "Please do." I held up my phone. "I've got 4 days of footage of you trespassing. I'd love to file a report. Also, while we're at it, we should probably talk about your little unauthorized neighborhood council newsletter. Pretty sure impersonating a board decision and using a non-member's property without consent is legally questionable. But hey, I'm no lawyer." Greg, still pink and steaming like a boiled ham, slowly turned to her. "Wait, you told us he agreed?" Linda froze. I assumed he wouldn't mind," she stammered. "You used community funds for this?" he asked flatly. Her eyes widened. "It was only snacks and a few newsletters." "You used my name," I said, stepping closer. "You used my property. And now, you've bathed the neighborhood council in chili dye." That's when one of the other women, Susan, I think, whispered, horrified, "I'm going to be blue for my granddaughter's baptism." And that's when the unraveling really began. Linda stormed off, trying to salvage her dignity while dripping blue onto my deck. The others followed, muttering. Greg lingered just long enough to apologize and mumble something about reviewing bylaws, then shuffled after them, carrying his folding chair and the very sad, untouched deviled eggs. I spent the next hour replaying the footage from every angle. Then I uploaded a highlight reel, Linda's grand entrance, her Smurf-like transformation, and the chaotic exodus, to a private link and sent it to a few trusted neighbors. One of them asked if they could post it to the neighborhood Facebook group. I shrugged. What could possibly go wrong? By Monday, the video had been shared 27 times. By Tuesday, it hit Nextdoor. By Wednesday, someone turned it into a meme. My favorite? A screenshot of Linda mid-scream, with the caption, "When you try to annex a neighbor's property but accidentally annex yourself into a chemical disaster." It didn't take long for the fallout to reach the county office. A municipal inspector showed up that Friday to investigate the unlawful boundary expansion Linda had been pushing. The whispers of community fund embezzlement grew louder. And suddenly, Linda had a lot more to worry about than her new blue complexion. As for me, I kicked back in my fully reclaimed hot tub, sipped a well-earned beer, and watched as Linda slammed her front door, cursing into the evening air. Justice. Served at 104 degrees. When the neighborhood council says Bob, but forgets the "don't sit in the engineer's hot tub" clause, the fallout was swift and glorious. Linda tried to spin the narrative, claiming I had booby-trapped my own property in a targeted act of malice. She showed up at my door with a clipboard and a scowl, demanding I remove the footage and issue a public apology. I sipped my coffee and said, "Sure. Right after you explain to the rest of the council why you've been watering your lawn with water from my private well." She blinked. "Oh yes, I hadn't forgotten. Months ago, I'd noticed a drop in water pressure and traced it to a suspicious hose running from a capped access point on the far side of my yard. Guess who had quietly tapped into it under the cover of landscaping work? That's right, Linda. My well. Her garden. A very one-sided arrangement." She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my phone. "I have receipts, Linda. Water meter logs, video, and a signed work order from the contractor you hired." She stared at me, furious, blue still faintly tinting her ears, and whispered, "You'll regret this." I smiled. "Not as much as you're about to." Because flushing her fake little regime out of my hot tub was just phase 1. The well? That was phase 2. And phase 3? Well, let's just say it involved garden irrigation contamination and a very awkward backyard gathering. But we'll get to that. At this point, the war was on. And in a war against a neighborhood council dictator like Linda, you don't bring just petty revenge. You bring plumbing. By the time the blue dye incident reached peak meme status, Linda had gone from feared council queen to neighborhood punchline, the kind of punchline that made people cough into their drinks at block parties and exchange smirks when she jogged by in long sleeves, still trying to scrub off the last hints of turquoise. But she wasn't the kind of person to accept humiliation quietly. Linda wasn't just licking her wounds. She was planning a comeback. Unfortunately for her, I was already 3 steps ahead. Revenge was no longer enough. I wanted a full collapse. And she handed me the next phase on a silver platter. A day after her failed attempt to demand an apology, I received a very formal-looking letter in my mailbox. Not via email or a council drop-off. No, this was hand-delivered, printed on faux parchment, and sealed with the neighborhood council logo like some suburban royal decree. The letter claimed I was in violation of unsanctioned property modifications affecting the community aesthetic, citing my new security lights and motion cameras as a disruption to the visual harmony of the neighborhood. It ended with a proposed fine of $500 and a threat of escalating penalties. There was just one problem. I wasn't under neighborhood council jurisdiction. She knew it. I knew it. The board knew it. But Linda was betting that if she wrapped her threats in enough official-looking jargon, I'd either panic or just pay the fine. Instead, I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Then, I drove straight to Greg's house. He answered the door in socks and a golf shirt, looking like he'd aged 10 years since the chili dye incident. I didn't waste time. I handed him the letter. He read it, frowned, and asked, "She sent this herself?" I nodded. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like a man whose last nerve had just filed for early retirement. "She doesn't have the authority," he muttered. "She's been sending these to multiple households lately. I was told she'd stopped." "She hasn't," I said. "And if you want her out before she drags the entire board into a lawsuit, you might want to take a look at this." I pulled up my tablet and showed him the footage I'd been compiling, not just the hot tub incident, but months of Linda's sneaky council overreach. Unapproved inspections, letters, secret meetings. My personal favorite was her banging on a neighbor's door with a tape measure because their porch light was allegedly too warm in tone. Greg leaned back, silent. When I finished, he said, "Would you be willing to share that with the rest of the board?" "Gladly," I said. "Just let me know when." He called an emergency neighborhood council meeting that same week. And to my absolute joy, he came prepared. Not only did I get to present my case in full 4K detail, but I also got to watch Linda squirm as the council members, many of whom she had strong-armed for years, saw the full extent of her corruption. And then came the final blow, the municipal inspector. Turns out, Linda had been playing fast and loose with community funds, misappropriating money under the guise of beautification projects. A formal audit was launched, and let's just say the results weren't in her favor. The council wasted no time in voting for her removal. Linda stormed out of that meeting, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But the best part? As she left, still faintly blue from the dye, she tripped over Lord Ripples, my floating turtle pool toy, and cursed loudly enough for the entire block to hear. And that, my friends, is how you take down a neighborhood council dictator, one hot tub at a time. Invited to present my case, not as a member, but as a concerned neighbor and unwilling victim of neighborhood council tyranny, I arrived with a neatly prepared digital presentation labeled Operation Linda Fallout. For the next 20 minutes, I guided them through exhibits A through Z, unauthorized newsletters, forged signatures, surveillance footage, and, of course, the unauthorized water diversion. At one point, a board member gasped, "Wait, she was charging wine tastings to the landscaping budget?" The best moment came near the end when I played a clip of Linda saying, "Mark doesn't mind us using the tub. He's probably off hugging trees, or whatever." The room went silent. Then someone chuckled. Then everyone laughed, except Linda, who had arrived 10 minutes late and now stood at the back, arms crossed, face unreadable. The vote to remove her was unanimous. Officially, she was relieved of her leadership role pending an investigation, but everyone knew what that meant. She stormed out without a word. I followed at a polite distance, curious where she was headed. She stomped across the street toward her house, muttering under her breath. I lingered, half expecting her to turn and hurl one final insult. Instead, she flipped me off and slammed her front door. By the next morning, it was public. The neighborhood council sent out a notice informing residents of Linda's removal and a pending audit of council funds. Suddenly, people weren't afraid to talk. A neighbor down the street told me Linda once threatened to report their son's treehouse as an unpermitted structure. Another said she had measured the height of their grass with a ruler. Someone else admitted Linda had tried to sell them custom council-compliant mailbox flags she printed at home. She had ruled like a one-woman monarchy, and now the peasants were in open rebellion. But just when it seemed like Linda was finally out of moves, She tried one last desperate play. She filed a petition with the county, requesting to expand the neighborhood council's boundaries to include my property. I found out when a county clerk, baffled by the paperwork, called to ask why someone had submitted a hand-drawn map with my house circled in red ink and labeled non-compliant parcel. I nearly choked on my cereal. I drove straight to the county office with my deed, property map, and a flash drive of video evidence. The clerk laughed so hard they called in their supervisor just to show them. They denied the petition on the spot and flagged Linda's file for future scrutiny. I asked for a copy of her submission. It was glorious. Scribbles, crossed-out clauses, and even a section labeled Unlawful Boundary Expansion Strategy. She had basically tried to stage a hostile neighborhood council takeover like it was a military operation. Now, the gloves were off. I activated Phase 3. Remember how Linda had tapped into my private well to water her garden? Well, I had a professional plumber reroute the system and install a backflow valve to prevent any future tampering. But I did one better. I had the pipeline from an old and used gray water tank temporarily redirected into the line she had illegally connected, just enough to flush it with a non-toxic but extremely unpleasant mix of sewage-laced runoff. It happened at 3:13 p.m. on a Tuesday. Linda turned on her sprinkler system and was promptly greeted with the smell of hot compost and despair. Her backyard turned into a horror movie. Brown mist sprayed across her hydrangeas. Her roses drooped like they had given up on life. She ran outside in flip-flops, gagging, trying to yank the hose out of the ground. Too late. She called a plumber. Then she called the county. Then she called me. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to my backyard, sat in my now pristine, properly sealed hot tub, and toasted the sky with a chilled drink. Peace had returned. But something told me Linda wasn't finished. Not yet. And I was right. 2 days later, I received a mysterious blackmail note in my mailbox. No return address. Just a single sentence typed in bold. You'll be sorry when the neighborhood hears what you did to the council funds. The war wasn't over. Linda had one last card to play. And if she thought I was going to fold, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I read the mysterious blackmail note 3 times, each slower than the last. You'll be sorry when the neighborhood hears what you did to the community funds. That was rich, considering the only person who had ever played Monopoly with actual neighborhood council money was Linda. But the timing was calculated. Just as the storm had settled, she was trying to rewrite the narrative and cast herself as the victim. Classic move. This wasn't just desperation. It was her final Hail Mary, and it told me one very important thing. She wasn't out of ammo yet. She was just reloading. Linda wasn't dumb. Delusional? Yes. Entitled beyond comprehension? Absolutely. But not dumb. She knew she couldn't fight me on property lines or legal standing. She had already lost those battles in front of the board and the county. But character? Public image? That was still her battlefield, and now she was coming for mine. The next morning, my neighbor Tom stopped me by the mailbox, one eyebrow raised. Hey man, weird question. Did you really bill the council for your hot tub repairs? I blinked. What? He scratched the back of his neck. Linda's been telling people you filed a reimbursement request for damages. Something about claiming emotional trauma and replacing your hot tub water with imported mineral spring gallons. I laughed. Loudly. So loudly, in fact, that Tom took a step back. No, Tom. I didn't charge the council for anything. I didn't even bill them for the chili oil, and that stuff's not cheap. But the damage was already in motion. Over the next few days, rumors trickled in from all corners. Claims that I had exploited the chaos for a landscaping upgrade, that I had insisted my spa was spiritually violated and needed an exorcism, that I was suing the council for mental anguish. Linda had weaponized the one thing she had left, gossip. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I leaned in. I hosted a barbecue, but not just any barbecue. I called it the Backyard Reclamation Bash, a lighthearted celebration of clean water, clear boundaries, and honest neighbors. I printed flyers with a cartoon hot tub on them, complete with a smiley face and a tiny floating sign that said, "Private means private." I invited the whole street, council members and non-members alike. I even sent one to Linda, not because I expected her to show up, but because I wanted her to know she wasn't invisible. She was just irrelevant now. The turnout was better than I could have hoped. People came with coolers, side dishes, even their own lawn chairs. Someone brought a karaoke machine. It turned into a full-on neighborhood bash. Throughout the night, I kept things casual. I didn't push the story. I didn't show the footage. I just let people ask. And when they did, I told the truth, with a grin and just a touch of sarcasm. No embellishments needed. Linda had provided all the material. By sundown, the narrative had fully flipped. I wasn't the guy who went too far. I was the guy who stood up to a petty dictator and got creative about it. The guy who protected his property, his peace, and made sure the rest of the neighborhood could breathe again. Neighbors shared their own Linda horror stories with me, things I had never heard before. One guy admitted she once left a warning note on his windshield for parking at an angle suggestive of disorder. Another said she demanded to inspect his backyard for fence alignment. Whatever that meant. By the end of the night, several neighbors had already floated the idea of nominating me to the council. I declined with a smile. I'm more of a backseat sabotage kind of guy, I said. But even as the party died down and the last sparks of the fire pit faded, I had a nagging sense that Linda hadn't played her final card. And sure enough, it came the next morning, not in the form of another letter, but in something far worse. A visit from a municipal inspector. He showed up in a white truck, clipboard in hand, and asked to inspect my hot tub setup. Apparently, there had been an anonymous complaint about unpermitted structural modifications affecting neighborhood aesthetics. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching as he adjusted his glasses, flipping through paperwork. Linda wasn't done. Not yet. But neither was I. An anonymous complaint had been filed against me, alleging improper drainage systems, unauthorized exterior lighting, and suspected graywater misuse. It was a kitchen sink complaint, throwing every possible violation into one desperate attempt to trip me up. I smiled, welcomed the municipal inspector in, and walked him through everything: proper permits, water hookups, camera documentation. I even brewed him a fresh cup of coffee while he inspected the valve connections. The man was professional but clearly irritated that his time was being wasted. At the end of his inspection, he handed me a clean report and said, "If you ever find out who filed this, let them know false reports can come with real consequences." Oh, I knew exactly who had filed it. And I had just enough patience left to ensure those consequences would be loud. That weekend, I filed a formal harassment complaint with the county office, attaching all the anonymous notes, the fake violations, and video footage of Linda trespassing and tampering with my water lines. I submitted a copy to the neighborhood council board, the county records office, and, just for fun, the neighborhood Facebook group, captioning it, "Update. The jets are clear, but apparently the sewage lives on." Reactions flooded in. People were furious, not just on my behalf, but because Linda couldn't take a loss with dignity. She had to scorch the earth on her way out. But by then, nobody was following her lead. She had lost her power, her audience, and, as I later found out from Mike, even her voting rights within the neighborhood council. Her membership had been suspended pending an ethics review. And the final twist? Remember that unauthorized water diversion she rigged to keep her prize roses in peak condition? Well, after I shut that down and flushed the line, her garden started to dry up, slowly, quietly. Her once perfect flower beds turned patchy and wilted. The same week her sprinkler system was deemed contaminated and flagged for costly repairs. Her front lawn, previously awarded Most Improved by a local gardening group, suffered a rapid decline. The award had come with a plastic gnome and a home improvement gift card. She was not amused. Now, she doesn't speak to anyone, walks with her head down, still wears long sleeves. I hear she's been trying to sell the house, but word travels fast in a neighborhood like ours. Nobody wants to buy the former home of the chilly-dyed neighborhood council dictator who tried to annex her neighbor's property and ended up with sewage in her hydrangeas. As for me, I still soak in my hot tub every Sunday, just like before. Only now, I have a tiny floating sign that reads, "Jets only. Linda's not welcome." And instead of a rubber duck, I have a floating turtle with a golden crown. I call him Lord Ripples. Peace, as it turns out, doesn't always come from staying quiet or turning the other cheek. Sometimes, it comes from cameras, chlorine, chili oil, and a very well-timed party invitation. And as I sit back, cold drink in hand, jets bubbling at my feet, I raise a toast to suburban justice. Because when a fake neighborhood council declares war on the wrong neighbor, all bets are off.